Hey, welcome back to the in-home water testing video series by Mike Rogers and Daily Living with Water and All Things Water Treatment Academy. So the next thing is, you know your role as Dr. Mom doing tests at home, but when do you say when and who do you go to? Well, if you're seeking a second opinion, then typically what you're going to do is need to order a mail-in lab water testing kit. And what I want to do is just go over the pros and cons of those two different types of methods of testing. So let's start with the in-home water test first, and I'm just going to follow the notes out of my book here. The pros is that it is cheap to do it in-home. You can do it as many times as you want. Some people will go quarterly or monthly or semi-annually or annually or even biannually every 2 years, right? So that's kind of cool. After you've had your initial investment in equipment or the testing, measuring instruments for each type of water test, the only other out-of-pocket cost that you would have is a slight cost is for the reagents, because they do expire. And so that's nominal at best for everything that you do. Or batteries, you know. So there's that. The second pro benefit is that it's convenient. If you get on a routine, it's just like anything else, like when you service your car. You know when you're supposed to rotate your tires, change the oil, check the air filter, the cabin filter, all of these different filters, when to get it aligned. This is going to be a similar mindset, except you're driving the quality of the water in your home. Okay. The other benefit, I would say 90% of the time, is that you get immediate results when you do an in-home water test. You don't have to wait a really long time. There is one exception to that, and we'll go into it, and that's when you actually perform a test for microbiologicals in your water. Okay. Now, let's talk about the downside of in-home water testing. There's too many tests to choose from on the market if you don't know what to look for. There is just an abundance. You want to know if you have any of the forever chemical in your blood supply, you can spend $250 getting your water tested, or you can even get a blood test to determine that for yourself. But see if it's in your water. So there's an example. Maybe you want to test for radiological nucleosides. Nucleosides, yes, I can pronounce that word. So if you see in your neighborhood those interesting looking vents coming out of the side of a home, and you know it's not a heat source vent, it's venting air, there's typically a reason for that, and it's going to be that someone has levels of radon in their home, off-gassing inside of the basement and or into the crawl space, and it's coming into the house where people could be exposed to radioactive gases, which is radon. A derivative of that is radium. So it actually breaks off and goes into the water supply, and then it vents that gas up out at the highest point in the home. Typically, it's going to be a shower head at the top level of the home. So those are the kind of different tests that you can do. Iron, if you're looking for lithium, if you're looking for any kind of element or particular chemicals, you're going to have all kinds of things to choose from. I'm going to give you some best practices of making sure that you cover your bases in the home, and then if you need those other tests, it's typically going to be cheaper to just get a comprehensive water test through a mail-in lab facility. The other downside is that this is going to be my duh moment here. It's the requiring testing equipment. Of course, you have to have the instruments, just like Dr. Mom has what I showed in the previous video, where she has a blood pressure cup, the thermometer, the blood sugar, glucose, and also the oximeter for a finger to check the oxygen level of the person. So you're going to have a set and an initial investment for these tests, but it's not over the top. It's not crazy to invest in. The other is that these instruments from time to time will require calibration. I just did it last night for the pH meter that I'm going to be performing for you. I'm not going to show you how to calibrate because there's easy step-by-step directions should you pick up a similar instrument like the one that I'm using for the test. But just know that it takes a few minutes to set that up to make sure you have the low, medium, and high pH levels, and then to choose it that way. So it can go from 0 pH all the way up through the spectrum to 14. You don't, excuse me, that was me. We'll do a clap there so I can edit that out. So yeah, you have to calibrate, but once it's calibrated, it's pretty fine and easy to do. The next downside might be that reagents expire. Well, you know what? Food expires. Eat it while it's still good before it expires. Test your water before the reagents expire. And if you have to replace them, so be it. They're usually nominal. We're talking single-digit dollars here plus shipping, unless you can get them all at one place and make it even more reasonable for yourself. Don't get a lifetime supply of something because they typically won't last long enough for you to even use half of it. The other downside potentially is the potential for human error. You can make mistakes. Let's say that you forgot to calibrate or you didn't feel like calibrating, and then you started recording readings that were just way out of line, and it's a little bit like the boy who cried wolf too many times. It's like you have a false positive indicator, and that's why it's so important that you make sure that you calibrate first to set it up for the test. And then lastly on that is some of the test results needs days to complete. And as I mentioned before, that's a microbiological. Everything else you can usually get within a few minutes. With the pH meter, testing 3 things, which would be the pH itself, the millivolts, and also the temperature of the water. You can usually get that in under 5 minutes, or no more than 5 minutes if you have a reverse osmosis system. If you just start testing for tap water sources, it's pretty instant. So, seconds. So let's switch gears here and talk about the mail-in test kit instead of the in-home. So this is your other choice. So let's say you are that Dr. Mom and you're starting to get some readings that are really looking like they're beyond the margins of safety. That's when you want to invest in collecting samples, get the kit, and mail it overnight to a licensed facility. And then usually within 2 to 3 business days, you're able to get those results back. So I'm already giving away the pros and cons here. So the pros are you're going to get a wider selection of tests being performed. So I'm going to give you the ones that are most common to do from, say, either every month or every quarter or every twice a year, and then annually. What I usually recommend is a layered approach where you actually do get a comprehensive test at least once a year. It'll be good for you to confirm your readings, that the pH was in line with what you said, the TDS was in line, those kind of things. Now, they're not going to record temperatures. That's not going to be a big issue. Just know that temperature does play an effect in automatically correcting an adjustment based on the current temperature of water, whether it's warmer or cooler. It's a greater value. I mean, one thing that you need to appreciate is that these labs are using millions of dollars in equipment when they test It isn't just because it's a big building and people are wearing white lab jackets. I have actually seen plating of microbiological samples from medical clinics from around the northern hemisphere being tested, and it was a six-figure testing instrument, and it only had one thing that it tests for, and that is the microbiological. So usually when you have microbiological, it's either going to be a simplate test, which is the easiest one because you can culture and plate that within 2 days, or you're going to have an R2A, which is a more comprehensive, and it's going to take 5 days to get the culture. And then what this machine did is it did what is not humanly able to do. So a lot of these tests, if the culture just explodes with bacteria, then they usually will put some sort of initials that say too many to count or too numerous to count. This six-figure piece of equipment actually does the count. And so that's what's great about technology. So if you were a university and you had 100 sites that you were testing in this one facility, because maybe it was a school to work in dentistry, and so you're trying to pin down a source of bacteria and want to see if it's actually a trend that is going everywhere or if it's just kind of migrated into one sector of the entire school. And so you can use those, and even if you're still way off the margins, failing the bacteria test to be basically medically sound or a medical grade compliance, then you can say, oh, okay, so I'm still in six figures, but the last shock treatment that we did before we ran this follow-up test did show that it depreciated the numbers, and so it's starting to come down. So that can actually be an optimistic approach if you needed it. So that's an example of why you might use those kind of things. But there's many other tests that they will test for that you don't have access to, or you would spend so much money independently getting those that it just makes more sense to have a lab perform a comprehensive test. So that's the greater selection of the tests performed. The other thing is, and I just stepped on it, was it's a greater value. So you might spend $150, $160, but you get all this. It's like going to a big box membership store, and now you have enough toilet paper to fill up a Winnebago. But you got a great deal. So save the $500,000. So it's greater value. And then the last big benefit of that is that typically you're going to get a PDF report by email in a matter of days. So if you get it just right and there's no holidays in that week, if you overnight them something to be collected by the local pickup for FedEx or UPS, and it's overnighted on Monday, they get it Tuesday, they start plating and sampling everything that you did. And by the way, I'm going to give you a pro tip. Make sure that you follow those instructions to the letter. And if they say fill this sample all the way up, you want to make sure that they don't run out of your sample to perform all those other tests. Okay? So let's talk about the downside, just to have some balance here between the pros and cons of both. For a mail-in test kit, it might be too expensive for some people. You know, they're like, wow, $150, that's a lot of money. I think I'd rather just do a home test. Well, you're still going to spend a little bit initially to get your instruments, but because this is not a one and done process, you're going to constantly be testing your water over time at different intervals to make sure that your water has not changed, because it can. So there's that. Typically, it's going to be a slower turn time for the results. As I said, you got to ship it overnight. They got to plate the culture. So it's kind of like adding yeast to the dough, and you got to wait for it to rise before you can throw it in the oven. And they actually are using incubators to rapidly accelerate the growth of the bacteria culture that they put on to test your water by. So that's just one of the tests that they do. And then lastly, you may need someone to interpret the results of the lab test. Now, the students that I have that go through my training, they learn about, who to use and what to look for in a quality licensed lab facility. And, some of the best ones, they work 7 days a week. Not the people work 7 days a week, but they're open 7 days a week. So they're working this stuff around the clock to plate. So if you got it to them on a Wednesday or a Thursday, they're still going to be able to come up and plate that and get the couple days that they need for that test result to turn around in 2 to 3 business days and get you your results. Okay? So that's the pros and cons of using both types of water testing. And just know that I subscribe to actually having a layered approach where you do the typical Dr. Mom role in the home to make sure you're monitoring the water, everything's looking good, so that you can catch something and resolve it quickly. All right, so in the next video, we're going to be actually breaking out some of the equipment that you can be prepared to use in your in-home testing. See you then.